Hey everybody, welcome back. Welcome back. It's the 4th episode. Today we have a super melodramatic title, The Death of the American Dream. We're gonna get into some pretty good stuff about whether it's still good to be an American, whether hard work can get you ahead, and other stuff like that. So how's everybody doing? How you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. Yourself?
Wonderful. Pretty good. All right, let's just get right into it. So we're gonna do a quick couple, probably actually just one news story first before we get into the big topic. I know we've been doing race almost, I think, every week. No, we did the presidential thing for episode 2, but
we dived into race.
What's that?
We got into race a bit, even with presidential.
No, right, of course, yeah, right. So I know we've been touching on it a lot, but obviously it's a hot button issue, so we're gonna try not to beat it too much, but we do want to provide you, the audience, with some topical stuff each week. So right now we're going to talk about the Jacob Blake shooting. So Tim, did you hear about this? Do you know enough about it to summarize?
I can summarize what I know for sure. So the way I understand it was Jacob Blake had his kids in the car. He had pulled up on the side of the road. I don't know if he knew the people that were fighting, but I think it was 2 women that were fighting on the side of the road. He pulled up to try and break it up. The police arrived. Something happened in that time where he was breaking it up, and the police arrived, and Jacob Blake wanted to leave the scene, walked to his car to get in his car and leave. As he was walking away, there was 2 police officers that followed him with their guns pulled, shouting at him to stop and not walk and not go. He continued to go, open the door, and as he opened the door and tried to get into his vehicle, one of the cops reached out to grab him and pull him back, and at the same time fired several, I believe 7 rounds into his back. He was in ICU. I think he still is. He survived the surgeries. He's expected to survive going forward. He's stabilized and stuff, but he is, I believe, paralyzed at this point.
All right. What did you hear about it, Chris?
Yeah, so similar. And I'll be honest, I guess I'm guilty of, I've only digested the news that was on my timeline, so I have not researched this as much as I want to, but I will say, for what it's worth, a quick Google search shows up. I've heard reflectively everything Tim just said, but it does seem that one of the officers, the one who fired all 7 shots, has been fired from the police station. So it has been acknowledged as full misconduct. And it should be acknowledged as murder because that's what it is, or attempted murder.
Was it administrative leave?
No, it says fired. It just came out 20 minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
That's up to the date news. That's what we're all about here once a week.
That's right, yeah. Breaking news. You heard it here 3rd or 4th, but you heard it here.
You heard it here before USA Today.
Right. Okay, so... All right, Matthew, it's link time, actually. So this is going to be my link 3. I actually have a pretty good BBC article on this. This is, link 3. Let's see. BBC News. Jacob Blake, what we know about the Wisconsin police shooting. So the particular segment that I wanted to talk about this story, they actually have some pretty good details in here. The particular segment that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll fix something. I lied. He was not fired. The sentence was, officer fired 7 shots. And I said one officer fired.
Oh my God.
The link. It's like, I wish I could show you.
7 times.
Oh,
it says one officer fired. The whole link didn't load, so I clicked it and it's like, 7 shots.
Oh my gosh.
All right, so you definitely heard it here first then, unfortunately. And now we're going to get sued for malpractice. All right, so let's talk about this story. So let me just read some of this, right? I'm going to read a little bit of it and then we can talk about what it said. So as far as the details go, so this is down below the paragraph heading "What happened," and it says it's a little bit below it. So it says the person who shot the video, Rayshawn White, told CNN that before he began filming, he saw police wrestle, punch, and taser Mr. Blake. Okay, so there was an altercation. He says it was then that he started recording. Mr. Blake is shown walking around the front of the SUV. The two officers closest to Mr. Blake at this point on the video are white males. I just want to stop there for a second. What the fuck does that have to do with this story? That has absolutely nothing to do with this story.
It has everything.
I know. I'm just saying, like.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, obviously,
actually, to your point, real quick. It matters because we really can, with statistical significance, study after study has shown that implicit biases are real, and to the extent that implicit biases are real and we'll internalize them on ourselves, and that's what imposter syndrome can sometimes be. So actually, it could have been that there's also, now I'm not doing this to pander to a conservative audience, because I personally believe that white officers acknowledging race is important, but an African American officer could have done this just as similarly due to implicit biases on their own identity. Just as, to use myself as an example, definitely used to struggle with own implicit biases on what does it mean to be someone who experienced child welfare. Those negative perceptions, totally you can self-impose them. So, and that's collective, not just on the individual.
All right, so there we go. All right, so obviously we disagree on that, and then that was something we should have gotten into. There's so much on this stuff. It's like there's 15 podcasts for every podcast we have. But all right, so moving on. So they say that. So yes, the two cops were white. As he opens up the door and leans into the car, one officer can be seen grabbing his shirt and opening fire. 7 shots can be heard in the video as witnesses shout and scream. And then I just want to keep going a little bit here. Mr. White told the AP news agency that he heard the police officers shout, "Drop the knife," before the gunfire erupted, but said he didn't see a knife in Mr. Blake's hands.
That's the guy who took the video?
That is the guy that took the video.
Yeah, I mean, his hands were behind the door, so you don't know what he was doing, what was happening. And I mean, if he was truly reaching in to get a knife, that changes the story a little bit on why he was shot. I hadn't heard about a knife before. Like I said, I don't know enough about this to know. My biggest thing is there's so much that happens before he walks away. In most of these stories, there's so much that happens before the piece that you get to see that it changes the context, right?
Yep.
But the context is only, I mean, as important as it is, and it is very important, it's only a piece of the story. The piece that you watch here, where you have 2 officers following this guy with their weapons drawn, and he's walking away calmly, in my mind is an odd situation to be in. And if they truly felt like he was a threat enough that they needed to have their weapons drawn, unless he's just that much stronger than both of the officers and more well-trained than they are about being able to get him on the ground, you would have imagined that they could have restrained him.
Well,
I don't know what happened.
That article, before, they tried. They wrestled with him and they tried to tase him.
Yeah, he does look like a pretty strong dude. If you watch him walk around in the video, if you watch him, he looks like he's a pretty strong dude. But
right.
I still would imagine that the 2 trained officers would be able to keep him down. But maybe not. I mean, if taser didn't work either, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think
I heard 7 bullets, you.
What's that?
That was a rough joke. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, was he trying to get in his car to leave? Did the story that I heard where he stopped to just break up the fight? Was that really what happened? We're gonna have to wait and see what happens with more data coming out. But
right, and that's always important.
Yeah, and not that I don't want to pass judgment or anything, because in my opinion, it looks like the officer officers may have had a different choice to make there. But again, we don't know enough at this point to say that, and I don't know enough of the backstory. Like, why were they stopped?
Yeah. Right.
It's still so early, but I'll say this, and this might be the philosophical conversation that's worth the 16th podcast, is to what extent should police use force, and to what extent should police be using guns? I mean, when is it genuinely valid? Because to me, and maybe I think we'll agree on this point, is to me, a police officer is not meant to execute the law, it's meant to enforce the law. So above all and else, the goal is not to use force. The goal is, to me, if the guy was trying to run away, like, let him get in the car and drive away, and then follow him and then arrest him once he's parked. if he was going to pull out a weapon or a knife or something, all right, cool. Like, I don't think that then you charge him with force against a police officer. I don't think shooting someone down is meritorious. So I feel that our police force really needs to reflect the importance of minimized harm, and I don't know if I feel that we have that today.
Well, I mean, once again, I mean, this. I think we tried to tackle this in the first podcast. It's a really big question, but
Yeah.
I'll just say so for all of us in the civilian world. I'll just say so. I actually have some training in this actually. So I when I was in the military, I got trained as a security action force, and apparently. I've probably received more training than cops if it's true that on average they only get 3 hours of training a year. But
you definitely receive more.
Right. Yeah. So I'll just say this. So I'm not going to say that was a good shoot. And what I mean by good shoot is a justified shoot. Right. That's just the term for it. It's not a moral good that somebody died here. But being the person in that situation, you are responsible to keep yourself alive. And you are responsible to keep the bystanders alive. And so, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, but let's say that the circumstance is that I'm there. This man is violently resisting arrest, not in the footage we saw. So according to the article, violently resisting arrest, he got tased and he still bucked off the cops. Right, what we saw was him sort of like calmly walking around the front of the car afterwards, and then he's reaching into the car, right? And if he's reaching for a knife, I'm just gonna say at that point you really have forfeited the right to live. It doesn't mean you should die. It just means that when you ignore cops with guns pointed at you and you go for a deadly weapon in a car that has 3 children in it, you forfeit your right to live. Right.
Well,
once
it's
again,
speculation on what he was going in there to get and what was happening.
Right. So I'm assuming that the verbal that when the cop yelled out, "Drop the knife," that was real. I'm just assuming that because that's the only evidence we have. But like we've said, we should wait for the evidence to come out.
Because what if let's just say like it wasn't a knife and the cop thought it was? What if the dude was reaching for his cell phone? What if he was reaching for
Yeah. So I'm going to go further and say you've still forfeited the right to live, because when you're reaching into a car and the cop can't see what you're grabbing, so number one, you're ignoring verbal commands. Number two, you were just in an altercation with the police officers. You wrestled with 2 policemen. Number 3, tasing is not working on you. They tried to tase him.
But if he's innocent, if he didn't do anything wrong in the first place, then like.
Okay. Let me ask you, Chris, what would you do if a cop pointed a gun at you and told you to get on the ground?
I would probably do that, but if I didn't do that, I would be freaking out. I'd probably piss my pants.
Right. And so why? So what is it that makes you not hold him to the same standard?
It's a powerful question. I feel that regardless of the standard I'm holding myself to versus somebody else, I think the consequence shouldn't differ. I don't think that, if I had a gun pointed at me and I walked away, I should be shot.
Right, but that's not the whole context.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I feel like even if I reach out a knife, I shouldn't be shot for having a knife. I should be arrested and sentenced to prison for a very long time. I shouldn't be sentenced with death.
Right. So once again, there's a distinction there. Like I know I'm coming across as the real hard ass here. When I say forfeit your right to life, I do not mean it was a good thing that he died. I just mean that you should probably expect you're going to get shot, and that's on you. That's what I would say, right? And that's my opinion on it.
I completely disagree with that. I think that and sorry for my camera being messed up. I'm having some issues with it, but I truly think that it's the responsibility of the officers, the ones that should have enough training and enough experience and things in these types of environments to keep their cool and not put people's lives at risk until absolutely necessary. And for you to say, "Oh, you resisted arrest," or "You didn't do exactly what you were told, so you've now forfeited your right to right."
Okay, you're putting words in my mouth. All of those things together, all of the things that he did, all 4 of those things, and then reaching into a car and potentially grabbing a knife.
Potentially, like I don't look. It's a fine line. It's really hard to say, right? Like, but. This is why I asked you guys to look at the Whitaker case, because I thought I figured I would bring this up. But if the audience hasn't seen it, here, let me give you guys somebody to look at since my thing's not on.
Joe.
So I forget the guy's first name. I believe his last name was Whitaker. He was shot by police and killed in Arizona some time ago. It didn't make big gigantic national news for some reason, but the story that I heard was there was a complaint called on him. If you haven't seen it, go watch the video, please. There's a complaint called on him for noise. The neighbors called for noise. The officers were told that it was a domestic violence thing. There were 3 officers there, 2 on one side of the door, 1 on the other. They knocked on the door. I think they did announce that they were police, but in my opinion, it's pretty clear that he didn't know that it was the police or believe that it was truly the police. He answered the door with a gun in his hand. The gun was pointed straight down. It was on his right hip. He took 1 step out of his door, saw it was the police, put his left hand up in the air, and started to lower his body towards the ground and try to lower the weapon down as well, and tried to keep it away from all the officers, so it never pointed at them. It was never drawn or anything. The one officer on the right side of the door saw the gun as he started to go down to the ground, pulled his gun and shot him a few times in the back and killed him. So does he deserve, because he, let's just assume for the sake of the story, that he was legally carrying a firearm, answered the door with it by his side to make sure he could protect himself and his girlfriend that was inside if something shady was going on. I've heard stories of people knocking on your door saying police so that you answer and they can break in and rob you. So if the police were not standing in front of the eye hole, tactically that's a good decision. But so if he looks out the eye hole and he doesn't see anybody, what do you think? Right? So he answers the door legally with a firearm, never points it to the cops, takes 1 step out, sees what happens, immediately tries to put the gun down and get down to the ground and still gets shot and killed. Did he forfeit his right to life because
absolutely not,
because he decided to answer the door and try and protect himself?
No, absolutely not. Of course not. There's almost nothing that's the same in that scenario.
The thing that is the same is that, and the same as in most of these scenarios, the police are not well enough trained and do not handle these 100%. Situations appropriately. And it's not, and the answer isn't to say, well, the police are the police and you just have to listen or you have to expect to get shot. The answer is, how do we figure out a way to better train our police and make sure that the situations don't escalate to where deadly force is needed? Two police officers should be able to restrain 1 guy. Short of him being on, a drug or, well, we don't know what happened. You said they wrestled a bit and
there was the article.
We don't know. There's no video of it, right?
Correct. So we're waiting for details.
Exactly. But you're assuming that both officers fully tried to get him down and weren't able to. They could have missed with the taser. Who knows what happened? Right? Like, my point being is, the part that we could see, I do not believe he deserved to get shot or should have been considered in his own mind, I deserve to die for the actions I've taken. Now, where I will support your argument a little bit, and sorry to cut you off, Chris, I want to say these real quick so that I can work on my camera again. And a colleague of mine, or not a colleague, but a former colleague, a friend of mine, we talk about this kind of stuff a lot, and I agree with him in a way to say that almost all of these cases, the Whitaker case is an exception, almost all of these cases initiate with the person not following commands.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. Do I think they deserve to die because of that, or do I think that there should be some idea in your head that, like, I should expect to get shot because of this? No, I think that there needs to be better training to keep those things from escalating to that level of force. However, it's clear that that is the start of almost all of the instigations, or escalations are what I was looking for. And we need to be cognizant of that and try and help teach our children and our friends and our family, like, look, I get it. You feel like you're being disrespected. You feel like you didn't do anything wrong. It's just suck it up for a minute, right? Swallow the pride for just a minute.
Seethe. As one of my one of the old podcasts I used to watch, the host was like, if you're getting arrested, seethe, just be angry, and then buff it all out later.
Yeah, I do personally agree with Nathan just on the notion. I do think they're separate cases, but I also I don't think they're comparable in most regards. I do agree, and I guess maybe let this be my final note on this. There needs to be a serious conversation on to what extent is force legitimate from a police officer. I don't have names off the top of my mind, but I am aware that other countries do not use guns with their police forces, and they seem to be relatively effective. Or like the military, there's a lot more training that goes in the military than it does to be a police officer. So I think there's a huge room for improvement that can ideally. Yeah, I guess I would be surprised. You're definitely the expert on that, but there's a lot of room for improvement here. Obviously, there's room for improvement, but there's some life and death questions here, and when there's life and death, I think that's when there's the greatest kind of demand for serious introspection.
I believe Germany, at least when I used to travel there often, does not use their police do not carry firearms. However,
many countries.
Yeah, there's a big distinction in most of these countries, and that is that the population also doesn't carry firearms.
Right.
If your population is armed, it's going to be very hard to have a police force that's not armed, I think so.
So let's do a speed round right before we go on to the main topic. Let's say if it is accurate that he was reaching for a knife, do you believe that he should have been shot? Well, go ahead, Chris. We'll start with you. Just speed round.
No, I don't. I think that it should have still been approached in a manner of let's arrest first, and then this just increases the severity of the charge.
Okay, Tim.
Two-part answer. If somehow it legitimately got to the point where he was reaching in the vehicle right there, and they were that close to him, and he was reaching for a knife, then I do think that the police officers, to protect themselves, have to fire. If you know much about knife fighting and gunfighting at that range, it's very, very easy for someone to use a knife and defeat the gun. However, my contention is I don't think that it should have, from what I've seen. Again, there's a lot of information I don't know, but from what I've seen,
right. I'm not backing.
I don't think it should have gotten to the point where he should have been able to be reaching into the vehicle like that. So,
right, maybe, yeah. If the officers were trained in judo or something like that, they would have been able to subdue him. Something better training. I think I agree with that. And then I'll close it up with, I think honestly, you should expect serious bodily harm if you ignore police officers after wrestling with them and getting tasered by them, then reach into your car with, I probably think there's a gun or there's a knife or something like that. I think you should have a serious expectation that you're going to the hospital. And it's not a good thing. I'm not reveling in this. It's a tragedy anytime anybody dies, right? But
he didn't die, but it's a tragedy that
maimed or whatever it is. So,
and I think the biggest tragedy to I know it's supposed to be a speed round, but his kids were in the car.
I know.
Like they get to watch his dad
he
get
can
shot.
Take care of them.
It's
all around not good. So, yes, better training for cops. I know at least we all agree on that. So, yeah, here's to that. Okay. All right. So on to some lighter stuff. So we want to talk today about the economic situation of the United States of America, right? And it's a very broad topic. So try to corral me if you think I'm getting a little too broad or if I'm going into things you didn't want to talk about. But the idea of the American dream, loosely speaking, would be that you can come to this country or live in this country, and you can take yourself from the poorhouse to, riches, right? Rags to riches story. That's the story of the American dream. Or alternatively, some say the American dream is just, it's a good middle class, upper middle class suburban life where you have all the things you want, you're comfortable, that kind of stuff. But so we're gonna talk about whether that still exists and why or why not. So Tim, you were actually pretty into this topic, let's say. So why don't you kick it off for us?
All right, so I kind of define the American dream as being able to work hard, come home, and live a good life, and feel like you're able to improve your situation by working harder and doing the right things, and that you're going to leave your children off in a better situation than you're in, and continue to let them grow and improve, on that. And in general, I do think that you can still come to this country and do the right things and work hard and do pretty well for yourself. However, I think that's getting worse and worse and less likely as time goes on. Forget the exact term. I think it's production and non-manager workers or something like that. For those people in that category, they haven't seen their weekly wage increase since the 60s. If you take into account inflation and hours worked and all of that, they're still making the same amount as they did then. And that isn't true for the larger, the higher income people. Hold on, something's going on in the background.
You good? Is it your kid?
Squirrel.
All right, Chris.
It's a struggle, man. We have a cat over here, and like we replaced his feeder with like a toy box, so he has to like hunt for his food, and so I've been like, oh my gosh, I imagine Fig, you must hear Fig here and there, kind of opening his thing and trying to like get the kibbles.
No, your mic is pretty good. It tries to ignore stuff that's in the background. It doesn't always work, but that's right. The kind of mic you have.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for those who don't know, Nathan invested in all of our microphones. It's much appreciated.
Actually, Tim had his. I don't know. He's just using his headset still, I think, right?
Got it. Well, I definitely am all here for this. Well, Nathan, I'm going to be honest. I was a little confused on this. So I'm going to let Tim go now since you're here. I have not said anything. There's been nothing of substance in the past 45 seconds, so you're absolutely okay. I talked about our cat.
My 3-year-old decided to get up and come downstairs. So that's what I was hearing in the background. With my headset on, you guys may have been hearing stuff that I didn't even hear because I can't hear him very. So
you're fine. That's what 3-year-olds do.
Yeah, apparently.
So the average wealth and income level of the top 10%, whatever number you want to look at, the higher income groups, has far exceeded that of the middle class and especially the lower income, and that gap is continuing to widen, and it's getting harder and harder to provide for your family and increase your standard of living. So I think in general, it's still alive, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. And we can get into some of the details and why I think that it is declining and what changes need to be made to improve that. But that's my general impression of the American dream.
All right. Well, we might actually agree on a little bit more than I thought we did. But Chris, go ahead. What do you think? The American dream. Rags to riches.
I'm going to be completely honest. I think there might be a lot more agreement in this podcast than previous ones, and especially between you and I, because I really thought about things like, what would Nathan say if I said this? So a lot of that was going to be like, what would I say?
Glad to be your touchdown.
What is Nathan going to say? Yeah, what is Nathan going to say to income inequality is greater than ever? And well, you're going to say that poor people have air conditioners and the quality of life is much better than it was before. So To me, my idea of American dream is very much principled on the idea of upward mobility. Can the kids of one generation make the following kids, the next generation, will they be better off as an aggregate, as well as in relative factions? So to that extent, I think the American dream relatively is alive. I will say this: I would not have wanted to have been born in the circumstances of my life in any other country but this one. Granted, it's very possible the circumstances of my life would have never existed in certain other countries.
Right.
Right. We can go on a tangent there because I want to get into the weeds of this. But for my opening statement, I feel very blessed. I also realize in my own life, most people who go through child welfare don't get $250,000 funding, right, as a grant to their nonprofit. I realize right now I'm also in extreme end of the spectrum, like the normal distribution. I'm all the way over here. So to that extent, I've enjoyed the American dream. I'm enjoying it right now. I don't know if that same opportunity is for all fellow Americans. However, I will say as an aggregate, when you look at face value, before we get into the weeds of it, it does appear financially, GDP-wise, our country's doing good. But in the weeds, I think there's factions of our community, of our country, that is not experiencing the same privileges as the rest of us. And we'll get into that, but I'll let you go on to your opening statement.
Would that be a race thing? Race, gender?
Yeah, race, gender, geography. I think geographically, there's regions of our country. Appalachia, for a point, I think is one that we can really discuss.
Inner cities.
Due to globalization, Appalachia has been greatly impacted. I think we can discuss that. Yes, African Americans here who especially heritage-based individuals who can trace their roots back to their ancestors were slaves, and anyone really who is a person of color from the early 1900s onwards, due to redlining, due to the inability for people of color, men who served in World War II, to capitalize on their VA loans to create generational wealth. I feel like, for those populations, it does become very much a race and a race thing and an ethnicity thing, because we can really just to the statute trace legitimately legalized denial of the American dream, in my opinion.
Right. Okay. So, all right, let's hop right into this. So, all right. So, I kind of agree with Tim. I think it is factually correct. I think that the American dream is not as robust as it was. Right. So, the rags to riches doesn't seem to be as popular as it once was. And that's by statistics. I understand that it used to be that, I think it was the people born around World War II had like a 90% chance of living better than their parents did. But I mean, there's things to consider about that. And then, like, for example, I think their parents would have been the ones who lived through the Great Depression. So obviously 90% of them were better off. But then there's, I think now it's 2/3 of people. Tim, do you have the statistic? Because I didn't bring this one up, but I think it's 2/3 of people are better off than their parents now.
I don't know that statistic, but it's actually declining. It was 2/3, I think, for the previous generation, and now it's going down. So,
but it's important to know the amount of people who are better off than their parents is declining, but it is still over 50%, which means that people are on average doing better than their parents, right?
I'll look that up while you talk.
Okay. All right. I have. So, across generations. All right, so I have this link here. Let me see if this is the one that I want. Let me see. Yeah, so let's talk about this. All right, Matthew, this should be link 1. This is a Brookings Institute study. This is pulled up out of the archives. I love the Internet Archives. It's great. I wonder if my Facebook is on here. Anyway, so it's link 1. I'm scrolled pretty much 2/3 of the way down. And the paragraph starts with contrary to American beliefs. So I'm just going to read this out here. So, contrary to American beliefs about equality of opportunity, a child's economic position is heavily influenced by that of his or her parents, right? And so that sounds pretty bad right away. But it's also, so all of us kind of understand that. It's like, okay, if you were born poor, you're probably going to be poor. If you're born rich, you're probably going to be rich, right? So, but I actually took something else away from this article. So let me read these statistics. 42% of children born to parents in the bottom fifth of the income distribution remain in the bottom, while 39% born to parents in the top fifth remain in the top, right? And so that's a very strong correlation. Obviously, when you're looking for correlations, that one's pretty obvious. Like if you're born in it, there's a chance you're going to stay in it. But I took something else away from that. Basically, you have a less than 50% chance of ending up in the economic bracket of your parents. That includes whether you're rich or poor, right? If you're 42% likely to stay poor when you're born to poor parents, that means you're 58% likely to not be poor, right? And the same, if you're born to the richest top fifth, you have a, 41% chance? 50, 60, 61%, 70, yeah, 61, yeah, 61% chance to remain in, to not remain in the top bracket, right? So, and that tells me that there is that while it is obvious, right, especially like in a caste system where you have rigid tiers, it's pretty obvious to me. So I would expect. Here's how I should put this, right? I'll put it this way, and then I'll let you guys talk. I would expect those numbers to be 80%. I would expect that if you're born poor, 80% of people will remain poor, right? And I would expect that if I'm born into the middle class, 80% I would stay in the middle class. And the same for I would expect that.
Why do you expect that?
That is what I feel, right? I'm just talking about how I feel and how I think a lot of people feel about this.
Well, I mean, in that case, then hard work and effort and that doesn't matter at all. It's only the opposite.
That's not the point I'm making. We can talk about it.
But that's how you would result in 80%. Right? Like
Correct.
if hard work and effort mattered, either only 20% of people try in your example, right, or they don't matter. And it's all about who you know and what your options were.
I do personally see the merit in that point, but I do agree. I would have presumed that those numbers of those who were born wealthy would have been much higher. Yeah, I would have anticipated that.
My only point, and then I'll let you guys talk. My only point is that less than half of people born in whatever economic strata it is stay in that strata. And we're talking about the extremes. It's a little bit different for the middle class, but I mean, to me, that's hopeful, right? That means you like picture that. Like it's not a massive margin, but you are most likely not going to be poor if you were born in the bottom fifth. You're not going to be in the bottom fifth. Right now, it's still 42%, but that's not 80%. It's not 90%, right? So, all right, go ahead. I've monologued.
Hey, real quick, I posted a link. It's my link too, but it is the information you're asking for on how percentage of people that are doing better than their parents. There's a graph there. It's the first chart on that page.
I see it all the way down at the bottom, Matthew. All right, I'm gonna click on this. We're going to the Brookings Institute again. I wonder if this is the one that's mine. I wonder if I have this one pulled up.
I just looked real quick, so I don't know.
All right, Chris, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, so I think when we were discussing income inequality and upper mobility, those two things go hand in hand, which is why I'm going to discuss income inequality. I do believe in upper mobility. I do genuinely believe that is something that's beautiful about this country. And I think that's one of my I think Democrats and liberals and people on the progressive side, we get a lot of slack because at least right now it feels like, I'm much more openly willing to criticize the government at a pretty intensive level. And that's both President Obama era and President Trump era. Like, I'm not afraid to call out President Obama for all of his deportations, right? So because of that, I think we look at this idea that it's like we're un-American at times. At least that's what it feels like, whether or not that perception is accurate. And so one of the greatest things about this country that I truly believe in, and I'll say this any day of the week, is that there's no other place in this world that had I been born, would I be in the circumstances I was born in. Granted, again, I think other places, different circumstances, would I have experienced the upper mobility I've had today, as well as most other individuals who were born in let's look at Russia, for instance. Because I'm going to take the child welfare. That's my expertise. That's what I'm going to lean into right now. When we look at Russia, it's 85% of all individuals who end up in an orphanage are like in extreme poverty upon like leaving an orphanage. 50% of women end up in prostitution upon turning 18 if they grew up in an orphanage. Now in the United States, it's like 17%. 17%. We look at that number and we're like, wow, that's a bad number still, right? Like 17% of a whole population is ending up in prison by 21. But Russia, it's like 80%.
Right. Yeah, that's a bad number in absolute terms, but by deviation from Russia, holy cow.
Mm-hmm. And so now other countries do this a little bit better. Many do it worse. We, for what it's worth, our country, at least in a predominant amount of states, we do a good job investing in social infrastructure. And that's why I believe in this country, and that's why I believe in it. I also will say this, and this is the caveat on this. when we look at other dynamics of developed countries, so now I'm going to exclude Russia, exclude China, and this is I'm indulging in this, and I'll share this link afterwards as well. Of developed countries, we are definitely ranked on the higher end of the spectrum, and this is coming out of the United Nations. Excuse me, in terms of child poverty. That's bad to me because I also believe in part of the American dream is ensuring that we have children who are growing up unimpoverished, right? Because poverty, trauma, these things link directly into lifelong outcomes. They go hand in hand with abuse. They go hand in hand with parenting. They go hand in hand with drug abuse for a lot of good reasons. If you're poor, you don't care about how you're going to be making your money. You're going to be selling drugs. If you're selling drugs, you're probably going to end up using them. That affects a kid's development. That also affects that kid's ability to access the American dream down the road. So I think it's that. Yeah, go for it. I'm talking a lot.
Before we get to Tim, so why do you think that you have excelled beyond the statistic saying? Why have you managed to realize in part, and you will continue, I'm sure, realizing the American dream where others have not?
Totally. No, I think it's a valid question. I think when I look at my life, I still want to touch on race and ethnicity, which I've not talked on yet. But so I'm going to circle back to me at some point on this. But when I look at my life, I think there's a few critical factors. First and foremost, we live in Connecticut. I live in Connecticut. Connecticut, we're a blue state. We've had Republican governors, but we're a blue state. There's some red states that do this, but for the most part, Connecticut, California are really on the leading end of the spectrum that have truly invested in child welfare infrastructure. They've truly invested in social service infrastructure because they know what it's worth, right? So all those tax dollars that paid into my existence have easily been paid back into the system through my own labor as a productive adult through human capital, right? And so when you look at that equation, it actually makes a lot of sense to invest in child welfare infrastructure. Many states don't. So I was born blessed on the American dream to be in a state that invested in my college, that invested in my healthcare. I have healthcare through the Department of Children and Families. That's because there's no parents, right? So that has saved my life at times. I also look at it this way. I was privileged to grow up. My biological mom, when she was raising me, she had some serious problems, right? She was struggling with drugs, homelessness. Even when we were homeless, so funny, but she would drive me to the same school system. So I grew up in a relatively suburban, definitely not relatively, I'm not going to chalk it up. It was a suburban school system. And that really helped me. Not because suburban schools are better than urban city, but I happen to also have gone to a really exceptional public school that really allowed me to capitalize on my education, allowed me to build up mentors that really lifted me up. And those dynamics early on, there was a youth group in that town as a result of that school that pulled me in, really helped invest in me. So I think meeting the right people in the right context and the right environment and having the foundation of resources for all of that to blossom is why I've been able to actualize this dream versus Louisiana, where it's like, 70% of their foster youth are like fucking homeless by 19, right? So Louisiana is straight up Russia right now. So let's talk about there's differences in state.
All right, Tim.
I kind of want to sit back and let you guys talk for a minute. Let
me say this then.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you want to do that, Chris, I think it's because listen, you can and they do give many children like you in Connecticut the same opportunities. But I think what separates you from all of those other people is that you have an incredible optimism and a hard work ethic about you, right? And those two things, I think, are the ones that have separated you from the crowd, right? That have pushed you to the end of the bell curve, right?
But I think what I understood from Chris's point is a lot of his personality and his traits and those things that you just said are the reason he succeeded. He developed because of all the support system that's around him. Do you think he would have developed the same? Do you think he'd have developed the same traits and personality if he was constantly worrying about where he was going to live, or if he was going to have insurance, or any of these other things that happen in areas where they're not when he's not supported correctly?
Sort of. This is the nature versus nurture argument, and I actually recently learned that a lot of personality, for example, the optimism that I was talking about, that's actually genetic. It kind of blows my mind to think about, and we could, we probably shouldn't get into that because that's fun stuff too. But
I would probably still have. I've thought about this a lot, honestly. I think I still, at my core, I would have still experienced a level of upper mobility, but not to the same degree. So,
probably.
So to that point,
yeah.
Nate, I probably, So also, let's just talk about what upper mobility means for my family. My mom died from heroin, right? So if I became a manager at a McDonald's, I'd be considered like a king in my family lineage. So,
wow, yeah.
And also, no hard thing to manage the McDonald's. That's a respectable job to me. So,
absolutely.
Hell yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So, but that is like where I was coming from too. So yeah, I would probably fit in that early statistic you shared that, yeah, I would be better off than my parents. I would have experienced upper mobility, because upper mobility in that case was like making $8,000 a year to making $30,000 a year.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about this other link then. So a lot of the thing, when it comes down to race, a lot we talk a lot about sort of cultures of poverty, and it shouldn't be a race issue necessarily, because there's communities in Appalachia that are poor just as much as there are communities in the inner cities that are poor, right? And there's and then in the inner cities, it's not just Black people. There's also Latinos, right? And there's people of all races are impoverished, right? So, but when it comes to the conversation around race and the American dream, there's a couple of things I want to say. So you mentioned redlining, and that is, so let me just say this. So redlining, for people who don't know, I think we've talked about this before. Chris, give a quick primer on redlining. Go ahead. I don't want to mess this one up.
Sure. So basically, banks were deciding where geographically people were going to be receiving loans to be able to invest in their homes and whatnot. And banks drew lines basically 100% over segregated areas. And so if you lived in an already existing segregated area, in proximity of those and within those, you would be denied a bank loan regardless of your qualifying standard. You would have to be moving outside of it to be able to get that loan. Okay.
So my question for you is, how long has it been since that was a widespread practice?
It's been about 90 years. However, the implications of them are pretty severe.
Agreed. And wealth travels, but at the same time.
Did you say 90?
90 years.
So not 90 years. The practice a little less. I
thought it was in the 40s or 50s.
Yeah, that's like 80 years.
Okay.
30s and 40s.
Well, 50s is 70. But.
Right. Math. We can do math here. I don't know.
50s when you look at the VA loans being denied because of redlining.
Okay. All right. So I will not look. So I will not deny that. Obviously, there's continuing problems so poverty is handed down. We've agreed, right? We've seen that 42% of people in poverty stay in poverty, right? Born into poverty, stay in poverty. But some of those people don't. So when it comes down to like solutions for that kind of thing, I think we've been skirting around the edge of it, right? And so the thing is that conservatives believe, and this has nothing to do with race, right? That's why we get so frustrated with this conversation, because it's always, for some strange reason, it's a conversation about poor Black people, where there's poor everybody people, and everybody needs a solution, right? And so conservatives, we look at studies like this link that I'm about to show with you. This is another Brookings Institute study, and it talks about if you as an individual, forget about what race you are. It doesn't matter what race you are. If you as an individual today in the United States want to get out of poverty, there's 3 things that you have to do. So let's take a look at this link. So this would be my only link left, and that's probably my link 2. Yes, link 2. It's 3 rules. Wait a second for him to pull that up. I'm going to be starting in the middle of the second paragraph here, and I'll read it out for you guys. So, let politicians, school teachers and administrators, community leaders, ministers, and parents drill into children the message that a free society, they enter adulthood with 3 major responsibilities. At least finish high school, get a full-time job, and wait until age 21 to get married and have children, right? And that stuff sounds incredibly reductive, but we go on to the second paragraph. Our research shows that of American adults who have followed these 3 simple rules only 2% are in poverty, and nearly 75% have joined the middle class. And that's defined back when this came out, which I think it was a couple of years ago, defined as having around $55,000 or more per year. And there are surely other principles at play, but following them guides a young adult away from poverty, right? So this is a study where they simplified it and they went for the strongest correlations, and they found that if you do those three things, again, finish high school, get a full-time job, and wait until age 21 to get married and have children. Like, that's how you don't be impoverished in this country, right? And so that to me means the American dream. By the way, Chris, you're muted if you're trying to jump in here. That to me, that means the American dream is there. It's there for the taking. For everybody who's impoverished, all they have to do is not do those is do those things. Finish high school, get a full-time job, wait until you're 21 to get married and have kids. Like, easy.
So yes, I agree, but not easy, right? Okay, that's probably where I disagree. Right. I affirmatively agree with you if those are the three things that you do. But I want you guys to, like, I don't know what your lives look like, and our viewers, I guess. This book, you should read this book. It's called The Corner. My rabbit chewed the bottom of it, but it is by David Simon, and there's another author that my rabbit chewed his name away. So sorry, you're not getting credit right now. But very, very powerful book. There's a TV show on it. Your minds might be jogging it because it became very popularized. Basically, these journalists from the Baltimore Sun decided to say, all right, what is actually going on in inner city Baltimore? Because we keep writing about these drug arrests. We keep writing about these murders. What is actually going on? And so they took some time and they did narrative interviews. And so what's really cool about this book is they're all true stories, true lives they followed. They write it as if you're reading Harry Potter, and then every other chapter it flows into kind of like a policy-based perspective. And what they found, and what most scholars have found when there's another great study called Read Righteous Dope Fiend if you're looking for a powerful book on, a skeptic on the problematic nature of homelessness communities. But anyways, what we find is sometimes there's infrastructure in parts of our countries, infrastructure both physical and social, that are completely not conducive to the American dream. So it's not about what you're doing, but sometimes people are born in such a cycle that it actually can't be broken. So for instance, this is anecdotal that represents many people in Baltimore. You're born to drug addicts. Your parents were born to drug addicts. It doesn't matter. I can say, why are you still a drug addict? But if everybody around you is doing drugs, your parents are doing drugs, you're doing drugs, 70,000 daily users of heroin exist in Baltimore. That is now a cultural public health problem. This is no longer one person doing something. It has become so enigmatic that it is now a cultural of the city. It is a social issue. So when we look at, which I think most conservatives would agree with, and they point to Baltimore very often on this issue. I'm going to go on a mini tangent, but I promise I won't make this too long for the sake of your guys' ears. When we look at an individual, there's one person in this book who really replicates the stories of many others in the sense that he tries for upper mobility, right? So he lives in this one part of the city that hundreds of thousands of people live in. Because of the transportation system, the unreliable transit, the public transit, he doesn't have a car. He's been doing drugs. He finally says, all right, I'm going to stop selling drugs. I'm going to get a job. So even though I'm making $2,000 a week selling heroin, I'm going to go make $7 an hour at a McDonald's. He goes in for an interview. The manager's not there. He gets on the bus back home. All right. Goes the next day. Because of the unreliable transit, he's late by an hour and a half. The manager says, sorry, we're not going to hire you because you've been late. Even though this is a dude who was on time the day before, and now because of transit, on no fault of his own. And so now he's like, you know what? I'm going to go back to selling heroin because I'm making $1,000 a week doing this. Why would I that's what my parents do. That's what my friends do. That's what I've done since I was 7 years old. You got 7-year-olds pushing this shit on the street. How do we reconcile that, right? How do we reconcile This is beyond race, right? This is a problem of Appalachia, and very much when we look at the opioid epidemic as a problem of OxyContin, right? How do we reconcile those dynamics? Because in those communities, there is no American dream, right? In those communities, it's way higher than that 41% that aren't escaping it. Most people are getting trapped. I think the life expectancy in Baltimore is 32 years old.
Wow.
In Appalachia, it's not that much higher. So when we're looking at those types of things, I'm using this selfishly. I'm taking a black and white scenario to just kind of protect my arguments right now. But the reality is that's the truth of what we're dealing with. So how do you reconcile those geographical areas and allow the American dream to come to fruition there? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm on board with you, Chris. I was going to take an approach a little less specific, but at first glance, simply saying finish high school, get a first full-time job, and don't get married or have kids until you're 21 sounds super easy to do, right? Except we all have been instilled with values that drive those items from childhood. And if you think of the majority of impoverished families, if all it took was doing those three things to not be impoverished, the likelihood is the parents didn't follow those three things, and possibly their parents, right? So to the point of Chris was making. And so if we weren't raised with those values, if we weren't taught that going to school is important and getting good grades is important, if we weren't taught to respect having sex with people and, be careful and wear a condom or not have it at all until you're a little older or whatever your beliefs are, there's easy ways to make mistakes there as well. And I think the biggest fallacy is not the right word, but the biggest thing for those three is get a full-time job. It's an easy thing to say, not an easy thing to do. Even people that have bachelor degrees are struggling to get full-time jobs sometimes. Like getting a full-time job, especially one that can pay a living wage, isn't as easy as saying get a full-time job.
Right. So keep Trump on for the next 4 years, and then unemployment will just.
And to kind of go back to that particular, I don't think that particular line should be in there. If you do these things, you won't be impoverished, because it's like saying make money and you won't be poor. That's ridiculous, right? Like you can't say, well, if you don't want to be poor, go and make money. How do you get to the point where you can go and make money, right?
I look at it in a hopeful way as well, though, just to say, like, all right, if those are the three things, then, all right, if that works, how do we get more people to have those three things? What do we need to do to actualize that dream? If it is, and you know what, for the sake of it, what it is, we know when we teach, we are not teaching abstinence-only education, birth rates at lower ages do go down, right? When we're saying, all right, you're 15-year-olds, you're 16, 18, you're probably going to have like sexual relationships with your peers. Use a condom. Don't say like, don't worry, don't have a baby, and a pelican's going to fly over your house one day when you're 27 and drop off a little basket. That's like not how it works, right? But that's a lot of places.
I'm going to agree with you there. I'm going to move away from the conservatives who are, my audience. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I generally agree. I mean, obviously, the truth is best. So if you can, if being realistic with the training is and not wishing that you can just force sort of an abstinence-based Christianity onto people, that's not going to help anybody. The more realistic you are about it, the better the results are going to be. Treat them like people and educate them about what's actually going to happen.
And I think too, just real quick, the other notes, it's like, all right, that tackles a little bit of the kid problem, but when we're discussing the high school diploma problem and the working, it's like, okay, we also need to talk about this. How are we going to make sure that people, Hartford, Connecticut, 90% of people in Hartford, Connecticut receive a high school diploma as of right now, this generation. The last generation is not the case. But what does that mean right now? What does that mean?
Yeah, there's the whole education thing too.
Here's the problem. The average high school senior, the SAT score in Hartford, and this is the hard truth, this is the fact, is at like an 8th grade reading level. So a high school diploma coming from Hartford, Connecticut, on average, it does not speak for everybody. There's some a lot of brilliant people, a lot of capable students who have had their education like stolen from them in a sense. Okay. However, also plenty of students that their high school diploma is worth an 8th grade reading level. How do we change that now?
Right. So let me
yeah.
So specifically on that, and then I'll say something else too. The study that I said with those 3 rules. I know we like knocking on them, and some of your criticisms are valid. You know,
I support them.
Right.
Yeah.
Me too. Right. At least they're generally good ideas. But the thing about them is that it doesn't say you have to get a valuable high school degree. This just says finish high school. That's all you have to do. Right. And then you have that high school diploma. Right. So, and just for the audience, what a correlative study means is they're not looking about the why. All they did was they looked at they just did a statistical analysis of people who moved up, who weren't poor, so to speak, and the strongest correlations they found were those 3 things.
Yeah, and that's why in a correlative study, you're going to get a response that says, if you make money, you won't be poor, because that's correlative. Right? If you have a full-time job, you're generally making money. If you're making money, you're not poor.
Right, but those things are not as simple as make money and you're not going to be poor. Right? That's an analysis of how you can get to your adulthood and enter into the middle class. I mean, those are things that you can do that will affect your outcome.
I guess let's make them happen.
Right. So let me ask the two.
I mean, let me ask you this then: do you think if you removed getting a high school diploma,
and we're going to go down,
and sure, but you were still able to get a full-time job, right? The high school diploma helps you get a full-time job. If you can get a full-time job, right, then that solves the problem. So I don't know. I just think that third point there is kind of cyclical.
So they would if simply getting the job and not having kids and getting married until you're 21, if it was just those 2 things, they would have said that. They would have said that there's a very strong correlation between just getting a job and not having kids until 21. Right? But they didn't. They said that statistically speaking, these are the things. Right. So, let me ask you guys. So, and this is a tough question, especially when you're talking about kids. Right. So it's easier with adults.
Sure.
But when you're talking about the cultures, the practices, this is how the things are. This is what we expect of people. And this actually goes into the conversation we were having earlier about Jacob Blake. When I said, well, what would you have done in that situation? My question for both of you is so I've heard a lot of justifiable and pretty good excuses, like stuff that we can understand, cultures of poverty, cultures of drug use, cultures of whatever it is. When can you assign individual responsibility, right? At what point are people responsible for themselves, responsible to stop using drugs even though their community does that, responsible to go to school even if it's not cool, responsible to get a job, responsible not to have a baby mama or 3, right? Like in any culture, black or white, right? So
that's a really difficult question because it's what you define as responsible, not what their culture defines as responsible, and that's the difference. Is they don't have exposure to what the values and the things that we do, right? They don't know that that's the important thing to do, or that they should do this or not do that. It's not about being responsible. It's not like they know. It's not like saying,
right,
hey, you know what? I absolutely understand that high school is extremely important, right? I know that, but I'm not going to do it anyway.
But that's something that we on the right call the bigotry of low expectations. It's like, oh, well, they're poor and, whatever. So they can't possibly be expected to know that doing heroin's probably not going to get you ahead in life. Like who doesn't know that doing heroin's probably a bad idea? Except for
I guess that's the thing.
People.
I think value-wise, a lot of people acknowledge, again, going back to Righteous Dope Fiend is a powerful book, and actually talks, for the sake of race, a lot of the individuals it talks about in that book are predominantly white in inner city, San Francisco, I believe, or San Diego, one or the other, but significant people of color as well in this community of heroin users that are homeless. But one of the interesting points I remember is, someone says to the anthropologist, he's like, I fucking know that, sharing needles is bad, right? He's like, but that's what do you expect us to do? Like we're on the street where like what do you expect, right? and that like was very shocking to me because it was defeat, right? It was just utter defeat. It was like this is wrong. This is what it is. And so to me, I think that to answer your question head on and to complement my storytelling, there is I believe there is independent individual responsibility begins at an exponential rate of on oneself from the point that they are emerging from a high schooler, from a teenager into early adulthood. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say this. I believe that is not a fair end game of that point. I believe that there's also a cultural responsibility, a collective responsibility to say, all right, for those of our society that are really struggling, the people at the bottom of the barrel, what can we do as a collective society to help lift them up in any way that we can, to give them the opportunity to take their individualism to the next level? Because I believe there's places that we don't allow individuals that same level of upper mobility because we're not collectively investing in them, right? So as a collective, we should invest in opportunities that create pathways for individuals to rebuild any lost individual responsibility that they may have, for whatever reason, dissolved.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think, don't take my statements to say that individuals shouldn't have responsibility. Part of my core belief about life and how things in an ideal world would run is that we have less laws and more personal responsibility and more, punishments when you do break those laws. Like I feel like you should be able to do what you want, but obviously there's laws about what you can and can't do to other people. But unfortunately in this world that doesn't work. But I still go back to what I was saying before. People are responsible for themselves, but as far as looking at how do we help people, I don't think it's simply saying, hey, you're responsible for yourself. We need to leave that on you. I think we need to look at why they act the way they do. And to say that, people know something's right or wrong isn't necessarily the bottom line. Look at religion. Religion is very much passed on from parental values to children. Right. And if you look at cultures, the people that you grow up, whatever the religion is that's around you, you're vastly likely to follow that religion as well. So it's clear that even just from a religious standpoint, those types of values and beliefs do get instilled in somebody as they're growing up. And I think that also applies to standard of life. If you see your parents doing drugs, regardless if they tell you drugs are bad, go to school, you're going to feel like, well, obviously they can't be that bad. Yeah, I get it. They're bad. But really, like, how bad can they be? Or my parents didn't graduate high school. Why should I? Why do I need to do that? Subconsciously it's important, but you just don't feel it. You don't have that drive. You don't have that core value system. And I think we need to work on policies that can help educate and advance those values in societies that don't have them right now.
Right. So I would kind of agree, right? So first of all, I'll just point out, okay, so obviously conservatives are real big on individual responsibility, right? And it's mostly for people who don't have extenuating circumstances. But it's even for people who get, let's say, especially adults who get addicted to a drug. Well, you knew what you were doing, right? So like, even though you are now in trouble, that's kind of your fault, right? And so it's like a very hard knock kind of thing. It's not, you wouldn't say it's empathetic, but that's kind of just how conservatives roll as far as policies go. However, conservatives are really big. And I always wondered about this, right? Because when I was getting red pilled, I was like, yeah, but I mean, there's people that genuinely do need help, right? That was my thought. It was always in the back of my mind. And I'd be listening to Ben Shapiro drone on about this, that, and the other thing, and individual responsibility. I'm like, yeah, but some people can't help themselves. And Tim, you were telling me about somebody that who wasn't the highest IQ individual, and he really needed some help, right? And it's a good thing for him to get help. And so the question is okay, well, if you don't want these policies, what do you want, right? And so the thing with conservatives is that we're also very much community oriented, right? Which really stinks because inner city and rural communities are often shattered by drug use or by poverty. But people, so let's say this. So if you help people through the state, through a policy, the state is going to have absolutely no granularity. The state is not going to know whether you are deserving or undeserving of such certain benefits, right? And so when I say deserving or undeserving, I mean, is this person going to take this money and spend it on drugs, right? So the government can't tell that, but a community leader who's running a food drive, who's running a soup kitchen, knows exactly what's going on and how to help that person, right? Not just to leave them out in the cold. That's not even what I'm saying. What I'm saying is community-centric help is probably going to be way more powerful than sort of broad spectrum government services to a certain.
But here's the happy compromise. I think we're actually in a place where there's going to be a genuine agreed compromise. Something I firmly believe in is state and federally funded nonprofit organizations at the community level. When we look at here's the hard truth. If a nonprofit is functioning entirely off of private donations, meaning from the community, that's a unicorn nonprofit. They're like almost non-existent. If they are, you have like someone like you have me prior to this week slave laboring away at a point that at some point it's going to fail. 90% of nonprofits that are at the community level have funding from the federal or state government. Not all, right? So you can point to celebrity nonprofits. You can point to, Joe Biden has a nonprofit, right? Trump had a nonprofit, right? So yeah, these are self-funded. Those are unicorns. But when we look at the most efficient ones, they're typically, we take a state contract, we show that we can do the work, we proposed for it, and then we receive this funding that, we report to the state, we report to the government, but the reality is these nonprofits, mine included, are so community run and community oriented that it's like, we do fit that. We do fit that mold. We know exactly what's going on on the ground because we're not transplanted. So I think the compromise is, I think actually a lot of people on the left would disagree with this, is I'm more on the side of, yes, government funded intervention, but the intervention shouldn't be coming from the government. Right. I believe that we should use the government as a catalyst for funding and then load up nonprofits.
Yeah, that's a pretty decent compromise. And I think realistically, a lot of conservatives don't really have an issue with that. Like, we always prefer individual responsibility and community, like solely community, like getting your act together, helping your neighbor, getting your act together, then getting your family together, then getting your community together, like that kind of thing. Personal, grounded responsibility that can make communities flourish if everybody pitches in. But I think a good reasonable compromise is what you were just talking about. So, Tim, you had a lot to say about. I forget. You had a lot to say about. I don't know. This whole thing was a very impassioned conversation we were having after hours. I know you had a bunch to say about. What were we talking about? This is how we got on this whole topic. Was the American dream is sort of dead and you can't get as far ahead.
I thought we were talking about trickle-down economics more than we were talking about.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's kind of a separate topic, but
yeah, that's kind of what I thought. When you said I had a lot to talk about it, I think it was more along those lines. But I mean, this is still there's still a lot to talk about here too, and I do think that you guys, that's a great compromise. It's a great starting point to drive things from a community level. And have it being funded from the government. And that's kind of being done now, and it can be expanded upon. But I also think that, if we're going to implement social policies, I don't know that we need to, or that's the only way to do it. But if we do, we have to make sure that we're implementing them in a way that actually targets and drives the results that we're looking for. And I think that's what we miss a lot of times when we look at large social policies from the government. And in a given example, you made the comment, Nathan, that, if we just give communities all this money, how do you know that you're giving it to the right people, that it's not going to be spent on drugs, things like that? So, I want to find ways when we do these policies to target the money. And this is an example, not to say this would work or this is the right one, but to give an example of my mindset on this is, let's say we take that money and we put it into the schools and into driving education. And we tell the parents of these children that if your children have a 95% attendance rate, you get a check for this much money to help support your family, right? You're incentivizing these parents to instill the values that we want instilled into these children. If your family's able to pass drug tests and your children attend school, or whatever, but like put stipulations on these investments that you're making to help drive the results and the policies that you're looking for. I'm raising 2 kids right now, a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and when I tell them to go clean up, I don't just say go clean up, or here's a new toy. I'm not telling you why you got it. It's, hey, you did a really good job yesterday. You did the things you were supposed to. Here's a toy to say thank you for being a good kid or something. Like you reinforce these values and you use incentives to do so. But we don't do that in our social policies as well. And I think we should look into doing something along those lines.
I totally agree. I'm probably going to lean a little bit more on the moderate side, conservative side on this, but I am not afraid to criticize like failed government spending. I've seen so often where these agencies or universities that are public that or schools that receive this exorbitant amount of funds and just watch it get lit on fire. And it is truly, it hurts because like, yeah. I'm so blessed to now be on the side where I don't need to say like, what the hell, we're not funded, because now we are. But it's like, wow, like it hurts to know, because here's the thing, right? And this is where we're going to disagree, but this is where I think the compromise exists more than I am on the left. When I look at $200,000 of state dollars, right? When I look at, I think back, Nathan, Thomas, our friend Tom and Haley, they donated $300 to Sun when we first started. And I cried, dude, because I realized that money, like that's a week's worth of work. That's some hard-earned dollars that of someone believing it. So when I spend that $300, it's like, wow, this is 30 hours of work at minimum wage. I'm spending 30 hours. So when there's a $200,000 contract, that's 200,000 hours of energy that I'm using. This is not just dollars. This is 200,000 or 20,000 hours where people aren't slave labor making $1 an hour. But
yeah. Maybe in China.
But now this is where this is where we might disagree. My response is, when I see failed spending, is not dissolvement or disillusionment. It's revisionist. It's like, okay, we gave you $500,000. You dropped the ball. You're not going to get this much next time, but we're still going to fund you on serious conditions of now let's oversight. Let's, like, the government, to me, that's when the government can say it doesn't, but that's when the government should say, all right, let's revise this. Let's oversight. Let's see, what are you doing right and wrong? Because the service is clearly still needed. However, you just kind of dropped the ball on it.
Right. I think the problem with that, now we're sort of getting away from, I guess, I mean, this is all kind of related to the American dream, but we're sort of getting away from it. So I'll just say one of the problems with that, and then one of the huge problems conservatives have with government programs in general, is just that bureaucracy is not conducive to promoting the right people. Bureaucracy is a whole different animal than the free market enterprise is, right? Because in the free market, you sink or swim based off of your productive output, right? So if somebody's not pulling their weight, it hurts the company and you can fire the person, right? In a bureaucracy, almost nobody ever gets fired, right?
I think part of it is just to combat that real quick and swiftly. The reality is,
you've never seen Trump's cabinet, huh, Nathan?
Certain things are not meant to be. Certain things are not meant to be profitable, right? And there's certain metrics that need to be measured and considered successful that have no profit attached to them.
I agree. The military is one of them. So, like, I'm not one of those full-on laissez-faire libertarians, right? So I understand. So there's drawbacks to whenever you get a bureaucracy involved, you will lose a whole bunch of efficiency, you will lose competition, you will lose innovation, but sometimes it's necessary. So I will concede that. But the conservatives and we really believe that is as little bureaucracy as possible, and wherever the government is involved, there's bureaucracy.
That's fair.
Tim, anything?
Yeah, don't take my comment. I want to kind of just make a point here. Don't take my comment to think that I'm very much pro social, programs and things. Generally, I'm not. I think that to your point, I very much support, responsibility for self, but I do think that in certain circumstances, there are groups of people that just don't have the opportunity to pull themselves out. They aren't learning the values that they need to learn, and I think that we have the opportunity to go in and help these people, and we should take some advantage of that. But generally, I'm not much of a social program supporter. So,
yeah, fair enough.
And I do think that we focused a lot on the American dream for the impoverished, but we haven't talked about what the American dream looks like for the middle class. And I think that's also important. I mean, to me, if my parents were lower middle class, and I would like to. I think part of the American dream for me would be I would expect or would like to be able to do better than my parents did and leave a better life forward for my kids so they could do better than I did, right? And the dream isn't like, oh yeah, you just can feed yourself and you can live a long life. The dream is to continue to improve and expand and be able to feel like you're a valuable contributor and you can live a good life.
To accumulate wealth, right? Like there's nothing wrong with accumulating some wealth.
Well, if wealth is your goal, yeah, I mean, if wealth is your goal, I think that you should be able to do that. It's whatever your goal is, right? Like,
although, can I just say something? I think Nathan and Tim, I think you'll get a kick out of this too. So today I was like, I told my girlfriend Carolyn this earlier. I think it's really funny. So I was meeting with the person I'm going to hire as my assistant director, and we had to make cuts, right? Because I proposed a certain budget. We got $70,000 less than what I proposed, but still more than enough to work with. So I was like cutting things off. And then I said, I'm like, yeah, I would make yours and my salary the exact same, but unfortunately, it's actually illegal. You have to have like at least 10% difference, like in public governance. And she's like, well, I'd feel really uncomfortable if we had different salaries. And I'm like, she's like, you do more work than me. I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of like a socialist. So So let it just be known that I'm like the one American socialist that actually almost put his money where his mouth was. But the law stopped me from socialism.
No, Chris. You are the heart and soul of that organization. You deserve to make
I've been told.
You deserve to have as much wealth as the bottom 90% of your company. That's all I'll say.
I've been told. So I do get paid $5,000 more than my assistant director. So there we go.
Okay, so on this actually, so I feel like this might be more of a 9:30 podcast than a 10 o'clock podcast. But if we bring up my link my link 1 again, there's actually another part of that talks about, actually it's the same paragraph. And if you can bring it up and find it again, it's the contrary to American beliefs paragraph. But I'll just read it, and hopefully he's pulling it up. This has to do with the middle class actually. So, children of middle-income parents have a near equal likelihood of ending up in any other quintile, presenting equal promise and peril for those born to middle-class parents. And to me, I mean, listen, I mean, I could be reading into it, and I definitely have preconceived, obviously, conservative biases on this, but that looks to me like you can do whatever you want in this country. It's let's say the American dream is alive and well, especially for the middle class. Because you can, by statistics, go any direction, and you have the equal likelihood of doing it. And I really believe that hard work and work ethic and optimism, as I've sort of learned from you, Chris, actually, will get you very far. And I've heard a lot. So a lot of podcasts I watched are from people who were sort of like us. I don't want to put us in that group quite yet, but entrepreneurs who decided to do something with their life, and one of them is the person known as Gavin McInnes. I don't know if anybody's aware of this man, but we won't talk about him except to say that he's an entrepreneur. He's a co-founder of Vice. He got kicked off that. He tried starting a whole bunch of other stuff. He started like 3 or 4 different podcasts, and he just keeps going. And that's another part of the American dream, which is it's not going to be given to you with hard work alone. You can fail a lot. But one of the things about successful entrepreneurs is that they don't quit. They don't quit. If your studio gets shut down, you figure out how to move your cameras next door. You do it out on the street. If something doesn't go right, try again. If something fails, try again. Right. And so that's another big thing. Right. And so I would caution a lot of people on my side of the aisle and anybody who believes in the American dream. Hard work alone and luck is not enough to get you ahead. You're going to need to.
I agree.
Work hard and just get back at it when you get knocked down.
I do firmly believe that. Granted, I believe there's places in this country that we need to have significant social investment to provide that framework. But I think for the existing middle class and relatively lower middle class, I do believe that if you you have an education and you have the skills provided to yourself to be able to be self-sufficient in your endeavors, I do believe, I have to believe, and I think I'm a walking now symbol in a sense. I hate that word. That sounds really cheesy, but like I think there's a sense to say, like, if you work your ass off, even at a sacrificial level, things can work out. It's not guaranteed, right? Like this week was not guaranteed. I could have been doing this like crazy slave labor nonprofit building for another like 5 years, but I probably would have still done something along those lines and moved forward. So it's hard. It's sacrificial. You need luck. You need skills. You know, there's a great theory of essentialism. It's what are you good at? What do you like to do? And what needs to be done? And if you can fit those three criteria, then you're going to become the best at what you do, and success will follow as a product. So I do believe the American dream is well. It can probably be a little bit more alive, but for the most part, I think that there's opportunities to move up in this world if we seek out the right resources to do so and have the right energy and passion and fire to make it happen. I have to believe that because that's what I had to believe in to get to where I'm at today.
Right. And that's why I say, despite the fact that you call yourself a social justice warrior, you are one of the good ones. So talking about social justice warriors, do you believe that the far left, let's say, not all moderates and regular Democrats, do you believe that the far left despairs of the American dream? And why do you think that is?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. You know, no, I don't think they do. I do believe that their vision for the country at the very far left may be different. I think that what it comes down to is what it comes down to. I think the American dream becomes more analogous with the collective in the far left. So, for instance, the sentiment of how do we treat the lowest member of society is a reflection on all of us. That's an idea of very much the far left. It's like for the lowest members of society, those who are at the most severe levels, regardless of their faults, regardless, like including people on death row, right? If someone's on death row, how do we treat somebody on death row? And that's reflective of the whole world. So it's kind of like saying, even if we are thriving, even if most of us have an opportunity of upper mobility, but there are people severely malnourished in this country, right? That's a reflection on all of us. Now, granted, that is also that's holding the weight of the world. I believe this. I believe we need to fight to change the world, and we need to fight to make people's lives better. If we constantly are bearing the weight of the world, it's going to crush us, and we're never going to win. We can't fight that fight. We can do what's in front of us, but that takes all of us. But if we think we're doing it all on ourselves, we're not going to feel successful in that. Unless you're like Bill Gates, who can just dump $10 billion into like whatever, but we're not Bill Gates, right? And that's the reality. But what we can do, I say that proudly, I don't say it pessimistically, what we can do is change the lives of those around us, and then they will change the lives around them, and so on until we have this massive reverberation of a more better.
Yeah, that's I follow. I am somewhat of an acolyte of Jordan Peterson, and he wrote a book, 12 Rules for Life, and one of the rules is clean your room, right? It's a really stupid rule, or it's a very, short title, but the idea behind it is right. So if you are a person who can set your life in order, then when you go to set the world in order for whatever reason, through protest, through your civic duty, through, becoming whatever it is, working, whatever that you apply yourself to. If you have already set your own life in order, aka cleaning your room or doing other significant things around your household and your mental health, whatever it is, you will create change that you can't even believe. It will just, the effect will multiply on those around you, and you will be a positive influence.
No, I totally agree 100%. There's no disagreement there. I think that, even more so, you can actually take it one step further. In the spaces we surround ourselves in, the energy we surround ourselves in has a direct reflection of our inside. And so if we are surrounding ourselves in chaos, mentally, physically, spatially, then yeah, internally we're going to be in chaos. And how can we, one analogy, and then I'll be quiet. There's this great, I think Christians use this a lot, to be honest, but I really like it. It's this idea of if you have a cup, I'm use a wine glass for the sake of it, right? If I have this cup of water or wine and you're thirsty and I give you this cup, and I am the cup and this water, this contents are my ability to support others, then, and I pour out, well, now I'm empty. But if I over pour this cup and this cup becomes full and flows out onto you, well, now everybody wins, right? And then eventually yours are going to flow over to somebody else's. And so I think what we do on our insides, we can't light ourselves on fire to keep others warm, and we got to keep ourselves in relative shape and line to be the best for others.
Well, I think that's a pretty good note to end on, honestly. I know we were trying to do for the 2-hour podcast, but I think content fits right into an hour and a half, I think.
Yeah.
So, Tim, are you okay, buddy? Is your
Yeah, I'm having some technical difficulties with the camera. So I haven't been able to speak up as much because I've been trying to get it fixed. But one thing I was going to say to your point, Nathan, and I had a question for you, was you said that if you're born in the middle class, which I'm not sure which quintile that is in that particular study, is it the middle 50% or is it just one?
I don't know if they actually did quintiles. They might have just done if you were born in whatever the middle class bracket is, and then broken it into where you end up as quintiles.
So then my next question was going to be, I don't know this offhand, but where do those quintiles break? Right? It's not. It's top 25% income, top 50, top 75, and then top 100 or whatever. Right? So
it would be 20%, 20%, 40%. That it's not 25. That would be quadrants.
Sure. Okay. 20%. So my point is, if at the top 20% line is only 2% difference in income than the top 40% line, that statistic is misleading, right? So if the top 1% make 90% of the money, it doesn't matter which quintile you're in anything below the top 2%, because there's not much difference between everybody else, if that makes sense. So what I'm trying to say. So
we have some questions about their methodology. Unfortunately, I'm not looking at a raw data sheet. I am looking at a sort of a abstract.
Right. So if I would have read that article, my thought would have been, okay, great, you have an equal chance to go into whatever quintile, but do you have an equal chance of, going to the top 1% or the top 5% or whatever it is where that line makes sense?
I mean, I think it's pretty cut and dry. Like if you're middle class, you have an equal chance to end up at any of the quintiles.
I don't think it is cut and dry, and I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. The bottom 50% of the country own, I think it's 0.25%. It's either that or 0.025%.
Three people own the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50 half of.
No, I'm talking about purely in stocks, just because I know that one off the top of my head. The bottom 50% of the country owns 0.25% of the stocks. 0.25%.
Right.
Right.
They don't have any free capital.
So saying, hey, you have an equal chance of being in the bottom 50% or the top 50%, it's a huge difference in what you actually are able to do, right? Or if you look at, I can pull this up real quick. I can't link it because I'm having the technical issues, but the top 1% own 50% of the stocks. 1% of the population owns 50% of the stocks. So to say, hey, you're in the top 50%, well, are you in the top 1% that owns 50% of everything, or are you one of the few that own little to nothing?
Right. So I mean, you're talking about okay. So but now we're sort of leading into the income inequality, trickle down type.
Yeah, and that's what I know a lot more about and I'm a lot more passionate about. Yeah.
Right. And I actually meant to talk about that today, but while I was formulating the problem in my head, I sort of jumped over to the American Dream question, which I realized was a separate question. So we can talk about that maybe next week, or we'll mix it up and talk about it 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
So here's a little primer data then for the next time we talk about it, just something that's interesting. The top 0.1%, this is in 2016, by the way. This has actually gotten worse since then. The top 0.1% owned 17% of the stocks. The top 1% owned 50%. The top 10% owned 92% of all stocks in this country.
Right. So you're telling me rich people are rich?
I'm telling you that by saying I'm in the top 50% or top 75% of quintile of wealth doesn't necessarily mean I've been able to achieve an American dream.
Oh,
right?
So you're okay. Yeah, you're right. So I don't know if it's grouped by population. I don't know if it's grouped by wealth. It's got to be done by population, I would think.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's like wealth.
So we don't know what that means.
Exactly.
Necessarily.
And that's what I'm trying to say is like by saying, hey, you have an equal chance of being in any quintile. Well, it may be that other than the top 1% or 2%, the top 50% have very little deviation between their income. So you basically didn't move at all.
Well, but
you still increased in quintile
in the United States, right?
Do
So
what?
I mean, you gave us scary stock numbers, but the reality is most people in this country are not in poverty. I think it's 25% of people are in poverty. I believe
Well,
and that's
it's also how you define poverty.
true, but I'm just
It's a
using.
bit lower than that.
Is it? Do you know what it is? Because I thought that was a super high number.
I think it's in the teens, around like 14, 15%. 25, maybe if you looked up a number right after around COVID hit, but pre-COVID, it's like, 14, 15.
I think that's supposed to be under 44,000 a year, and that's the technical definition. I think. All right. So
Is it? No, I would say or maybe household income, but individual,
Right.
I believe it's like under 19 or 20,000
okay.
on the
Yeah.
poverty index. Is
Right.
that? Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, it's definitely not 40,000. 40,000 is like the median income in like Plainville, Connecticut, and that's definitely not poverty.
Yeah. And so, another thing on the American dream, we've said it a few times. I know we targeted mostly impoverished people, but the American dream we've said a few times is to be the ability to do better, and that your kin will do better, and that their kin will do better.
Yep.
And if you look at it in raw dollars, that's happened, right? So if you look in 1964, the average hourly wage was $2.50 an hour. And you look at it in 2018, and it was $22.65 an hour.
Mhm.
That's a huge change. But then if you take into account inflation and increase in cost for living and things like that, and you look at what the buying power is, it turns out that in 1964, the average wage was equivalent to $20.27 today, or in 2018. And in 2018, they were making $22.65. So their buying power basically didn't change at all.
right, but their quality of life.
I think it becomes like a hard. Yeah, it becomes a hard, relatively speaking, on both sides, just a balance. It's like, to what extent does income correlate to quality of life, correlate to buying power, correlate to? So here's another fun wrench just to throw this out there. When I was a teacher, I made $50,000 a year, right? Not a lot of money, but definitely a lot in consider. I felt rich, dude.
Right.
So 50,000 as a teacher. My take-home pay every 2 weeks was $1,250 because of taxes, because of union dues, and because of one other thing I randomly had to pay. At a group home that I made, $14 an hour to $17 an hour, I had the same take-home pay if I worked the same hours, even though on paper I was only making $30,000 a year because of the way taxes worked as well. So just a wrench, just to throw it out there, buying power of people making $50,000 sometimes is relatively around the same of those making $29,000 to $35,000 when we look at taxes, dues, insurances. Now, my answer to that is, quite honestly, teachers should be paid way fucking more, and group home workers should be paid way more. My answer is not to say that's an adequate amount to live off of. I would say that on the contrary, but we're talking about buying power. We're talking about these things. Just an important factor to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I mean it is important. And to go back to kind of what you said too, Nathan, you talked about quality of life. It's not about quality of life. Quality of life is going to improve whether I work or not. The ability for me to get air conditioning cheaper has nothing to do with the fact that I'm able to improve my income or my kids' income or my status. I mean, you look at the history of humankind or any technological innovation, and you always stand on the shoulders of the person before. Things always are getting better and easier and more efficient.
No. You ever heard of the Dark Ages? Civilizations rise and fall all the time. I mean, we have
as a whole, as an independent civilization, yes, not as a whole, right? We still stand on the shoulders of the people that came before us. They stood on the shoulders of the people who came before them. I mean, yeah, there's times where you move backwards and you forget things, or you purposefully do not allow them into your life, like the Dark Ages. You know, that was very religious driven, I believe. So, but if you look at modern history, cars are getting better. I can buy a better car now for the same price that I could buy back then, not because
free market.
It's not because of the free market. It's because somebody invented a technology and somebody figured out how to do it better. And you're able to continue improving on that. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel.
Let me ask you something. You're absolutely correct. So when we talked about bureaucracies versus free market, right? So for all of the civilian models, we get a new model each year, or we get a new, I guess, year on the model, because models are different models. So every model that every manufacturer has gets updated every single year, and that's a product of competition with other cars. Because if you put out a car that has that 2010s look, and then in 2011 you don't update it, but everybody else does, your car is going to start looking old, right?
It's also a product of competition with your own model. You want to sell a new car, you got to differentiate it from the car you sold yesterday.
Yeah, but you generally, yes, but that's only because. So let me finish the point then. So that's only because of competition to other car manufacturers, and you know that because look at the USPS. How long have they had the exact same mail van? How long?
Works. It does the job.
50 years, right?
You don't even have
to
mail van.
So hold on.
Bureaucracy.
Just to that point, because that one is interesting. I haven't seen the stereotypical mail van come through my neighborhood. That's because probably 20-something years. 20 years. No, they still show up. The USPS guy shows up in a van. It's just a minivan. It isn't the old box thing where he's sitting on the wrong side of the road.
Typical. All right. So I mean, look, Zing, you kind of got me, but I actually still.
But if it does the job, right? Like why also upgrade it?
So
like, these new mail trucks every year.
That's how bureaucracies work, right? And so what I'm saying is that the free market is not the same, right? There's the difference is that all of these new amenities.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. So all of these new amenities come because, Buicks, they don't have air conditioners. My cars, they have air conditioners right over here in Ford, right? And I'm probably totally messing that up. I bet Buick invented it. But my point is that the competition draws out the innovation, right? And then we all benefit because of the laissez-faire competition, right? Whereas we've seen the U.S. Postal Service stagnate. It's not profitable, like all that other stuff. It's a horrible bureaucratic organization that is being outcompeted on every front by all of the private companies, including Amazon, right? And that's the free market at work. And frankly, I think the United States Postal Service should be privatized. Not to get into that, but
yeah. So I'm not against free market as a general idea. I do think, as we've talked before, there's specific areas that aren't actually free because either the demand does not fluctuate evenly with a supply side change or anything like that. Which we've talked about before, like healthcare, right? Like it doesn't matter what the supply is, my demand is going to be the same. But regardless of free market or not, that's a separate argument from how trickle-down economics would apply and how that impacts the American dream and the chance for everyone to do well. And also, should they or shouldn't they, right? Like, so just another stat to think about. Since 1993, per capita GDP has increased about 40%, right? So our country's productivity, you want to say it that way, but income, let's say, generation of wealth has increased 40% per capita.
Mm-hmm.
The median household income since 1993 has increased about 5%. So 40% increase in overall wealth, whereas the average American only saw a 5% increase in wealth. And wealth isn't the right word, but it gives you the idea of what I'm saying, right? And so is that what we want? Is that appropriate? Is that the right way to do it? Does that drive better growth, or does that not drive better growth, right? And those are the questions that I wanted to talk about with trickle down. Why
should it improve? And I'm just asking a thought-provoking question. I believe
Sure.
it should improve, but why?
So
why?
let me
why
ask
is it a
you-
necessity, or why is it even normal that life gets better year over year? Right? As
I think-
opposed to maybe like
I
a 50% chance you'll go up or go down.
I think if I can answer this real
Yeah.
quick, because I do think this is worthy of a whole podcast, because income
Yeah, I know.
inequality is
That was
is
supposed to be this
being
podcast, but I messed up and I sidestepped
You're
into a
fine.
different issue.
You're fine. But real quick,
Screwed me.
one important thing is that I will kind of give into. Every year, our GDP has increased, right? Our GDP has consistently gone up every year. There is a very, very, very strict correlation between improving of your GDP and the social infrastructure of a society. I'll say this: if our GDP ever dipped, if it went down, that is when, to me, income inequality becomes the most alarmist, because that means there's a serious flaw in the system. That is when now there's been a wealth accumulation, or through malice, through malintended means. If wealth is so well concentrated, that's oligarchy, right? That's when you have oligarchy occur. Is when your
You made
GDP
a
is
jump there. I disagree totally.
Concentration of wealth doesn't affect. Isn't a direct resultant on what your GDP is.
No, but of course it's not. But what I'm saying is, if our GDP decreased and we still saw the same extreme of wealth inequality, that also means we're also going to have a diminishment of our social infrastructure. That's when I would become the most alarmed.
Well, I mean, to kind of speak to that point, our GDP did decrease from 2008 until about 2010 or 11, when it finally got back to where it was per capita.
Yeah.
So
What's the recession and all that?
Right, exactly. But to the point, I'm not sure exactly what you're saying there, but as far as GDP decreasing or increasing, but how long of a time frame are you talking or whatever? But and to kind of answer your point, Nathan, no, I don't think it's a guarantee in any society that you will do better than the person before you, right? And it used to be, before modern technology, you were just happy to be able to feed your family in many cases.
Right.
I mean, and this isn't that long ago. My grandpa, well, not to get into family details, but kind of my grandpa, told me stories of when he was a kid. They would eat soup all the time, because that was the easiest way to get nutrition to every one of the kids into the family. Just put all the stuff in a pot and spread it out. And he said I think he said he was 18. It was when he went into the military and he started saving some of his money. He went out and bought himself his own piece of meat for the first time in his life. And you hear stories like that, and compared to how we live today, at least how I live today, and that just blows my mind.
Right.
But yeah, obviously the goal is to continue to improve. So I would say that there's no guarantee that you should continue to improve. But my feeling is that if the economy as a whole continues to grow and generate more and more and more wealth, that the average median income of the household should generally track with it. I don't think that there's 1% of the population that's actually going out and doing all the work or doing all of the value add that is driving the GDP. They've just found out a way to take advantage of the situations to where that trickles up, right? They built a system that allows that money to go directly into their hands, and the policies of the government have allowed that to happen more and more and more as we've gotten further into this century.
Oh, so you mean freedom, right? So we haven't taken people's wealth to redistribute it. That's what you mean, right? The government has allowed Jeff Bezos to keep all of his money.
The government's also allowed Amazon to not pay taxes.
Okay, so if there's one case where we can talk about maybe they should be paying taxes, but those loopholes.
Maybe they should be. Maybe you want to quantify it with a maybe just in case.
Yeah, because they're probably getting tax deductions by giving to charity. That's my guess.
No, you know why they're not paying taxes is because they're carrying forward their losses from when they were taking all their revenue that they were making and dumping it back into the company to continue improving the company.
Okay, so change the law. They're following the law, so change it.
I agree. I'm not saying Amazon's a evil empire because they took advantage of the situation.
Right,
I'm saying these
does that.
policies were put in place by, this is getting into more politics side than we were planning on, but these policies are being put in place by bureaucrats that are supporting and being paid for by these large corporations.
That law is designed to help companies that are struggling.
I know, but it was not put in that particular law. I'm not saying is, but a lot of the loopholes, a lot of the tax loopholes for wealthy and for those individuals. And like, if you take a look back at when we're going to get into a lot more of this than I was hoping, but if you take a look back when the middle class was advancing more, the median income was keeping track with GDP per capita, the tax rates were higher. It's not to say that you shouldn't continue to benefit from more work and from actually doing things that build these great corporations and companies that bring wealth. But it doesn't mean that you need to also benefit exactly the same. And so the argument I want to ask, the question I like to ask, or argument I like to make to people that make that comment is, where do you draw the line? So if you look at our tax system right now, it's tiered, right? And for those of you out there watching that don't know, some people think that when you go up in a tax bracket, your entire grouping of wealth goes up. So let me say it another way. If you make $40,000 and the tax bracket is at $40,000, and let's say it's 20%, and if you make, but it goes up if you make 45 to 30, you don't get taxed 30% on your entire $45,000. You only get taxed 30% on anything that's in excess of the previous bracket, which was 20%. I'm not saying that very clearly, I don't think, but
yeah. Well, me knowing how it works now, because you told me, that made sense. But I can't speak for the audience.
So as the tax bracket goes up, like your first $10,000 you make, I think it is something like that right now, gets taxed at 0. Then up until $30,000 or something that you make, it gets taxed at 10 or 12%. And then the next from 10 to 20 from 30 to like 50 or 60,000 gets taxed at 18%, and vice versa, right? So as you move up in brackets, it's only the excess of the previous brackets that gets taxed at the next higher level. But anyway, it used to be in the 60s that the top tax bracket was 90%. It's an insane amount to think about, but 90%. If you were in the top tax bracket, 90% of your wealth was taxed. I think that's too high, but
right,
but the point
insane.
being that's what it was, right?
Right. Nobody paid it either.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just what the tax bracket was, and it's currently 29%. So from the 1960s until now, we've continued to see further decreases in that. But to the point of saying, well, why should the wealthy pay more? Well, then why don't we just have a flat tax that says every person? So hey, here's the budget we need to spend for the country. Every person in this country should pay $20,000 a year in taxes, or 15, or whatever that number ends up being, right? Because obviously there's certain people that can't afford to pay that. It would completely demolish them, right? So, okay, we'll give those people a break, right? So why do we not tax everybody equally, to your point? Why do the rich pay more?
Kindergartners would understand a flat tax, but the second you think about it more and you're a third grader, you realize that, oh, wait a minute, money has different burdens on people. So if you make $1 million a year, I feel like I'm talking like really down.
My question's not directed at you. It's directed at Nathan, who said that why should the rich pay more? We currently, in our system right now, that generally you guys are happy with, the rich do pay more.
Who's you guys? Or the libertarians
right.
Want that flat tax that Chris is
right.
talking
No,
about.
I don't want a flat tax.
You're typecasting, bro. No, all right, look.
It's a podcast.
You're right. No, okay, I'm mostly kidding. This is a really good conversation. I just love talking about how much Jeff Bezos that Tim shouldn't be allowed to steal Jeff Bezos's money. I love it. Like that's my favorite topic. We should do this. We're going to do this as a whole podcast.
It's a whole podcast.
We have 5 minutes left. I feel like we could probably. Oh gosh, we have 4 minutes left. Let's everybody speed round. Give us your final remarks on the American Dream, and then just we'll kick it off for the night.
Sure. Similar as before. I think it's we have to work on the alive part. I think upper mobility does exist. I think we need to make sure that more people have the tools needed to fully access the opportunity for upper mobility. Otherwise, once those criteria are met, then yes, I think upper mobility American Dream is obtainable for those.
Tim?
I agree. I think upward mobility does exist in this country, and I think that it's not terrible. I mean, if you compare the upward mobility in the United States to the rest of the world, we're generally doing pretty good. I think, we definitely should not sit on our laurels. We shouldn't say, hey, we have decent upward mobility, we don't need to do anything or improve, policies or anything like that. But I don't think we're doing terrible by any means. I do think, however, that the American dream is declining, that it is getting harder and harder to achieve the success that your parents had, and especially to exceed them. And I think that is a concern, maybe for my son's generation, or definitely for his after that. So, I think we do have some responsibility to our children, for those that have them, to look at these things and see why is it decreasing and declining, and how can we improve it. But it's not dead right now. It's in climate change mode, man. We got a chance to fix it. Let's figure it out.
Right. So at third time's the charm. The American dream is it's there. You can still do your thing. And even if you, let's say, have a hard time changing your stars, I mean, chances are that in this country you will have a certain degree of wealth. Most people, right? So obviously not everybody. And I do want to Chris's point, have programs, whether it's private or public, to help people who really want to change their stars to be able to climb the ladder. But I mean, I just think that America is an incredibly wealthy country. I think most people can live very, very good lives here at most, most quintiles, I suppose. So, and I think it's, optimism is due. I think as long as, and there's another thing too that I didn't really get into, but as long as you believe the American dream is real and you are willing to work very hard for it, and you are willing to accept failure and push on forward anyways, I think that kind of optimism will lend itself well to you, regardless of what quintile you were born to. So with that, I think, unless you guys had anything else, I think that's been a good podcast. Yeah,
sorry for my technical difficulties, everyone. Children unplugged my camera and messed something up, and I haven't been able to figure it out.
So stand your thoughts and pray for him. He's suffering from invisibility. All right, good night, everybody.
Good night.